everybody. We're going to talk about black and white photography today. Black and white's kind of my thing. I've been doing black and white photography for a long time. And as you can see, I got a bunch of things, probably more than we'll actually get to today, but that's okay. It's always good to have more than not enough. So I'm going to just open up this RAW file here. And how do I get rid of this thing?
Should be a little red arrow button you can click on the control panel. That should make it disappear, I believe. Little technical difficulties here.
No, I don't want to leave the webinar.
And don't do that.
All right, so
there's a red button, little arrow that should hide or show the control panel.
User error.
All right.
So I'm just going to go ahead and move this down to the bottom of my panel and enter the develop module with this RAW file. And I just want to talk about how to prepare a RAW file for editing in black and white, or at least how I do it. So what I'm looking for, and if I look at my histogram here, you can see that I have an image that's got a broad tonal range, lots of stuff in the shadows, lots of stuff in the highlights, a good exposure. But what I really want to do is I want to flatten this out. I want to get rid of all the contrast, or as much of the contrast as I can. And really, when I take this into the effects module and start to work on it, it's going to look pretty flat. So I'm going to just really bring my shadows up quite a bit and bring my highlights down a lot. You can see my histogram starting to get more narrow. And I'll bring my blacks up until I've got nothing touching the edge of the histogram. On this photo, I don't really need to do it, but sometimes I'll actually grab the contrast slider and reduce the contrast even more. So why would I want to do that? Well, the idea is that I want to control where I'm going to put my highlights and my shadows. And if I have highlights and shadows already, when I go in, then I've kind of boxed myself into a corner, right? I can't really start to do some dodging and burning in some of these places to create local contrast. So I just think it's really important, or it's really important to me, to the way that I work, to start with a flat image. So I'm going to go back to the browser here, and we'll just grab an image here, and we're going to go. Let's start with the version of this image. I've prepared all of these already, so we don't have to waste time by going into the develop module and doing the same thing for each one. So you can see how flat this is. Actually, the shadows are a little dark, so I'll probably start by just throwing a tone enhancer on here and bringing the shadows up a little bit and bringing my blacks up a little bit just to flatten this out some. There we go. So first thing I'm going to do is grab a black and white effect and convert this to black and white. So all of these sliders here control the intensity of my colors. And really what these are luminance sliders. So I'm going to open up my yellows a little bit and bring my greens down a bit. So typically foliage has both yellow and green in it. Sometimes I'll bring the green up and bring the yellow down. And in this case, I actually think that looks a little better. So we're going to do that. There's probably not a whole lot of blue in here, a little bit in the sky, and there might be some red in those rocks. Nope. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to add a filter here, and I think I'm going to go for some local contrast right away, and there's a really easy way to get that, and that's just to add a tone enhancer and go down to the curve. Well, let's start out by changing the blend modes. So these blend modes here are really handy for doing a lot of things. The ones that you're going to use the most are the multiply blend mode, which makes everything darker, the screen blend mode, which makes everything lighter, and these two right here, soft light and overlay. Soft light and overlay are contrast blend modes, and you can see that one's a little more aggressive than the other. Overlay is the more aggressive of the two cousins. And I think I'll start by adding a soft light blend mode. we can reduce the contrast of this, or the opacity of this just a little bit. And if I turn this on and off, you can see what I'm getting. So I've added some nice local contrast to this. And I think I'll go back down to my black and white filter here and just play with these tones a little bit. So a lot of this is kind of bouncing back and forth between the effects and just balancing your image out. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to increase that. And now my blacks, you can see, are getting pushed over to the left side of my histogram a little too much for my liking, but I like the contrast I'm getting. So I want to bring some of these blacks back. Down at the bottom of the tone enhancer, we have a curve. And the curve is, I always say, it's the best tool in any photo application. I don't care what it is. The curve gives you tremendous flexibility. We're going to use the curve later on to color grade some things. So right now, I just want to lift my blacks up a little bit. And I may be able to get away with it here. I may have to add another one. We'll see. So what I'm going to do is put a point right in the center here. And I'm just going to lock this down. And the reason I want to lock this down is because I'm going to make an adjustment down here in my shadows on my blacks, actually. And I don't want any of my midtones or highlights to be affected by that adjustment. I may actually put another one right here and just pin this down. So I'm going to grab this, which is my black point, and just lift this up a little bit. Now, if I start to go high, you can see what happens to my blacks. Let's bring this one up a little bit too. My blacks really start to open up. So I just want to open those a little bit. And I'm not going to get away with it here because I've already added contrast to this. So we're going to leave this and go and add another tone enhancer. And you'll see the difference. I'm not going to do anything to the blend mode. I'm going right down to the curve. And I'm going to pin right here and pin right here. And now I'm going to grab my blacks. See what happens? So if you want to get that matte effect that you get for black and white photos, here's how you do it. So I'm just going to lift those up just a little bit. And I don't have to go very far. I've only gone from 0 to 6. It's just a touch. And you can see the difference. Now I'm going to go in and add some of those shadows back, but I only want them where I want them. So I think I really want to start to look at my sky now and see if I can get some texture out of that sky. And we have the perfect tool for that, which is the dynamic contrast filter. And I've built a 0 preset for myself, which you can do just by setting all these to 0 and then saving the new style. And I just kind of like to start out that way. So let's see what we can get out of the sky, if we can get anything out of it. Probably in the large, we get a little bit. That's all I'm really looking for, is just some. There we go. So we just got a little bit of texture up in here. So that looks great. Okay. I don't want to add any of that stuff down here. So I'm going to put a mask on here. And I can either paint in or paint out. Doesn't really matter. I have a white mask, so I'm going to grab my brush tool here. And I'll make my feather 100 and my opacity 100. And we'll just grab a bigger brush. And since I'm painting on a white mask, I want to paint out. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint this out just like that. And now I'm going to look at my mask by clicking the view button and see if I missed anything. And I did. There you go. Perfect. Okay, so let's do a little dodging and burning now. So since black and white photography is really about tonal control and tonal distribution, the way you dodge and burn is really important. This part of the photograph is obviously our focal point, so we want to bring this water out and add some texture to the contours that are around here. So I'm going to start by doing a little burning. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the old photography terms, dodging and burning, because that's what they are, burning is darkening and dodging is lightening. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. I'm going to kind of overdo this because I'm going to put a mask on here and invert it. And by overdoing it, what I've done is I've given myself enough darkness there that I'm not going to run out, so to speak. So really, I just kind of want to add some contours to these hills and some of this stuff around here. So I'm going to be painting in, so I need to switch my paintbrush mode, and my feather is going to be 100. And I like to do this slowly because smaller brush strokes are harder to see than bigger brush strokes. So I'm going to change my opacity to 20%, and we're just going to start painting in. And I'm just going to paint in some shadows in some of these spots. In the rocks, I'm pretty good. I don't really need very much, and I'll probably do more dodging, more lightening on this photo than I will burning, and that's okay. So just do this a little bit at a time, and you can see what's happening here. Darken this tree line a little bit. And you know, this is like, I don't know, like meditation for me almost when I'm dodging and burning. Get to kind of wander around in the scene here and have some fun. So subtle, but there's my before and after. My rocks are looking good. So we're really gonna do some dodging in here, I think. Well, I'll add a tone enhancer to this. And I'm in love with the curve, so I'm gonna bring my curve up. And again, I'm gonna take this too far so that I don't run out of lightness here. So we'll add a mask and invert it. And I'm gonna make my brush a little bit bigger. And we're just gonna start to paint in. I'm using the same opacity brush that I was using before. And I actually think I'll zoom in a little bit here to make this easier on me. I don't want to zoom in that much. There we go. My computer's rebelling a little bit because I'm working and broadcasting at the same time. So we'll just start to lighten some of this stuff. Right? How do I know where to lighten? Well, I'm really just kind of working with what the photo is already giving me. And it's giving me quite a bit here. So, you know, we don't want to lighten everything, just kind of the fun stuff, the highlights, right? And I really want to start to work in these rocks a little bit. So just so you can get an idea of before and after here. There we go. You can see some of the shapes now starting to come to life. And that's the fun part. There we go. So I just want to encourage you that when you're dodging and burning, take your time. There's no hurry. And a well dodged and burned photograph is going to have a lot of impact.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
I think I should jump in here. There's a great question from Philip.
Yep.
With dodging and burning, are there any general guidelines on where on the image you should darken and where you should lighten? Is there any guidelines you follow?
Okay, so I would say two things, Philip. It's a really great question. One is to obviously, whatever dodging and burning you're going to do should support your subject. So in this case, it's the waterfall. So I'm going to do some, you know, dodging and burning around here because I want to create interest in here. And whatever I'm doing is supporting this shape here. Usually the way I start dodging and burning, and I'm always keeping that other idea in mind, is to start working on the things in the photograph that are already a little dark. I may want to darken some of them some more, and some of the things that are in the photograph that are already light, I want to lighten some of them some more. So those are the two principles that I can give you, and the way to really kind of perfect that idea is to just get in and do it. And you're going to start to figure out what the photograph is trying to tell you, because every photograph has a voice, and they're all different, and you want to let the photograph speak for itself. And that's really what dodging and burning is. You're letting the photograph speak, and you are adding your vision to whatever it is that you're wanting your viewer to see. So hopefully that answers your question. That might be more than you ever wanted to know about dodging and burning.
I think you got it covered there.
Think I got it covered? All right, so we're looking pretty good here now. There we go. And I don't really need to do anything up there. So let's just turn this layer on and off, and you can see what's going on here. I'm actually going to go back down to my burn layer down here, and I should probably name these. We can do that now, yay. So I'm going to call that burn, and let's call this one dodge, so that I don't get confused and grab the wrong mask. I'm going to go back down to this layer here. I want to do a little bit of work up in the sky, just a touch. And all I'm going to do is just, with a really light hand, just add some texture up here. And to Philip's question, I'm going to darken the things that are already kind of dark, and I'm just going to make them a little darker. So not by a lot, just to add texture up here. So when I put the dynamic contrast filter on here, and I was looking for texture, all I was looking for is a little bit, because I knew I was going to go in and start to do this kind of stuff and create texture myself. There we go. So if I turn this layer on and off now, you can see what's happening up in the sky. So that is looking pretty darn good. Okay, so at this point, I can start to kind of close my photograph down if I want to. I actually think I'm going to, well, let's see. I'm going to add a blur here, and I'm not going to add a big blur. So I like to add blurs because they give photographs kind of a rich, velvety feeling, and I use them really sparingly. I don't just smear it all over the photo. And if I change the blend mode to multiply, if you'll recall, that is a darkening blend mode. So obviously that's way overdone. There we go. So I got a little trick for you now. If I pull too much of this out, then I don't really get that nice velvety feeling that I like. But if I leave too much of it in, then it's too dark. But if I go down below the blur layer, and I'm just going to click on this dodge layer, and I add another filter, and I just add a tone enhancer, and I'll do something that's kind of a little counterintuitive, so you can see that that's below the blur, and that's to brighten this before I darken it with a multiplied blur. So all I'm going to do is just push the exposure up a little bit, like that. And I don't really need to add any contrast to it. That looks pretty good. And you can see that my blacks are starting to get a little out of hand here. So I may see if I can lift those blacks up here. I can. Good. So I'm going to pin this down and pin this down here, and then just grab this and pull it up, just to bring some of those blacks back. So now we're starting to look pretty good here. So I'll probably back this blur off just a touch. And I know the photograph looks really dark now, but we're going to fix that right now. So I'm going to add another blur. And this time we're going to change the blend mode to screen. So screen is a lightning blend mode. You can see what happens. I get this nice smeary blur all over the place. And I'm thinking that's actually too much. So I think I put the blur in the wrong spot. I did. I put it below the other one. So this is my darkening blur. I want this up here. There we go. So I can turn that back on. I think I did that. All right, there we go. So I think I'm going to put a mask on this dark blur too. And now we have the ability to make luminosity masks, which we kind of had before, but now we can manipulate them, which is really awesome. So I only want this in my shadows. I want to shut this down out of my highlights. So I'm going to grab a luminosity mask and I'm going to invert it. So if I look at this, now it's mainly in my shadows, and I can really manipulate this by playing with these levels here, and you'll see that the white parts, which are now the shadows in the photograph because I've inverted the mask, are getting darker. And if I just bring this over like this, I can really start to just confine this to my shadows. You can see I'm shutting my sky down completely. All right, I don't want to go that far. And you can see my water is completely eliminated. And as I increase the contrast, I start to isolate these shadows some more. So let's talk about how these controls operate and what they are. So I'm going to just pull this back this way. And we'll go back to the center here. Actually, let's just reset this mask and put another one on here. So I'm looking at the mask itself now. By default, what we get is a mask that masks out the lighter half of the image. And if I invert this, you'll see that now my blacks are included in my mask, okay? So I'm gonna go back to the darks mask here, there we go. And so what I wanna do is I want to really target the tones that I want. So these are the lighter tones in my mask. These are the darker tones in my mask. And these are the midtones. So I can tell the mask where I want my midtones to land. So what I want is I really want my lighter tones out of my mask. So I'm just going to shut them down. And I just want my shadows in there just a little bit, just like that. And if I take this mask off, you can see what I've got. So let's undo this tone enhancer and undo this. And that's what we started with. And that's where we're at now. So we've added a lot of contrast. We've added some nice texture in here. And, you know, this is starting to look pretty good now. So let's shut down the top of this sky just a little bit. I'll add a filter and a tone enhancer and come down to my curve and just pull this down. I'm just looking at that sky. And we'll add a little bit of contrast up there too. So I'm gonna make that a little darker. And I'll use the masking bug for this. So I want a linear top mask, I think. Maybe not. You just get confused about which one is which. There we go. I just want to darken that top of that sky just a little bit, just like that. And we can darken it some more if we want. But I think that's pretty good. There we go. Okay, so now I can start to think about a couple of vignettes. And I usually like to work with two if I can. So I will add a tone enhancer here and just darken the outer edges of the photo a little bit. And I'm going to, again, protect my blacks down here by grabbing the bottom part of my curve and just bring them up so they don't get too black. I like to see that detail in there. And we can use the masking bug for this again and just grab a vignette and just drop it on there just like that. And I can control the shape of this, which is really cool. And I think I want to make this a little smaller and just bring this in like that. And just make sure that that edge is nice and feathered. So that looks nice. Here's my before and my after. And I'm going to add another one just for the middle section here, because I know on my histogram I got plenty of room for that. So we're going to add a tone enhancer again, and this time I'm going to grab my curve and just go up and brighten everything up. And I want to keep the contrast that's in there, so I'm just going to bring these dark tones into line just a little bit. Not going to go nuts here. That's pretty good. And again, I'm just going to grab the masking bug, and I already have a vignette selected. So I have to invert this mask because it's lightening. Actually, if we look at the mask, you can see it's lightening the outer part of my mask, and that's not what I want. I want it to lighten the inner part, so we'll just invert that. And now I can go back here and control the size of this. So I just want this small and nice, probably round in here, just in this section. And whoops, I added another one by mistake. So yep, there we go. And I'm just going to pull this out like that, and we'll make this even smaller. Just kind of like a spotlight, right? And there you have it. So that's what we started with. And that's what we ended up with. We could make that outside even darker if we wanted to, and maybe I will. So it's down here. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. What do you think, Michael?
Got a few questions, so whenever you're ready, I will fire them at you.
All right.
We have a question here from John about your dodge and burn layers. He asks if you added them on separate layers to make different levels of exposure settings on the image.
That's exactly what I did.
Perfect.
So that's exactly that, because I manipulated the curves in two different ways. So if we go down and take a look at those, you can see that this is the dodge layer. I actually brightened this whole layer and then used a mask to reveal what I wanted. And on the burn layer, I darkened the whole layer and used a mask for that. So that's exactly what I did.
Awesome. And then there's another question from a different John here about pre-planning that you do for black and white before shooting. Is there anything you take into account, the lighting, the weather, to choose black and white? Do you just go all in for it? Is there something in the photo that sticks out to you?
Well, I'm always looking for a few things. A, obviously an interesting subject, but we're looking for that for every photograph. I often find, for me, that black and white works best if I can shoot in flat light, just because then I don't have to deal with any natural shadows. And I can fully engage in this process of creating darkness and lightness where I want. The other thing is that if I am shooting in bright light, I'm going to make sure that my shadows, I actually treat them as though they were just as important as whatever shape I'm shooting. So if I'm shooting a bunch of buildings and there's a bunch of shadows there, I treat the shadows as though they are actually part of the composition, because once you convert the image to black and white, that's exactly what they become. They become part of the image because you're dealing with a bunch of shapes, and those shadows become a prominent player in your photograph. So those are really the two kinds of things I'm looking for, the two main things. The other thing that I'm looking for is if I have color contrast in my image, that's going to make it easier for me to manipulate the color sliders in the black and white effects layer. So really what matters with black and white when you're shooting in the field is the brightness of the colors, and that can be deceiving. Sometimes you can have a red next to, say, a purple or a brown, and they're both equally bright, but that red looks really bright because it's a vibrant color. But once you convert that to black and white, they're both kind of the same. So I'm looking for those luminance values in the scene that are going to make it easier for me when I start working. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, awesome. That's great stuff. So just to remind everyone, there is a questions panel on the webinar control panel. So if you do have questions for Jim or for me, feel free to use that as you please. And Jim, just keep on going. This is great.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. Let's try this one. So this one's kind of fun. So this image I shot in Scotland, and this is actually inside a house. So obviously this manor, it was a noble manor, had been abandoned for a long time because you can see how mature that tree is. And I just thought this was an interesting scene, right? So we have here the old photographer's device of a frame within a frame. And this is just an interesting scene for me. So I'm going to just right away go for black and white. Now, there's not a lot of color information in here. Really, there's only red and yellow. I'm sorry, yellow and green, as you're going to see. There's a little bit of red. This stuff here is red, which will end up darkening. So what are we looking for here? Well, we're looking for tonal variations, and there's lots of texture in this wall, and we've got this bright wall back here and this dark subject up against the wall. So we've got three planes of existence within this photograph that we can play with, and that's cool. So, you know, do I want to brighten my yellows or do I want to darken my yellows? In this case, I think so I do go back and forth between these yellows and greens, and typically, you know, foliage contains both yellow and green, usually in a different combination, and I'll usually bring one down and bring the other up. If I bring them both up, then the photograph just flattens out. So the question is, which do I want to feature? And in this case, I think we will feature the yellow. So I'm going to bring the green down, and we're going to let the yellow really speak because there's a lot of yellow out here. So my reds, just those kind of rust stains there. If I bring them all the way down, then they get kind of ugly, so I'm just going to bring them part of the way down. There's no blue or aqua, and there's no magenta, so that's pretty much what we get. And that looks pretty good already. We can do better, but that looks pretty good already. So for this photograph, the first thing I want is texture, because we've got all this really cool stuff happening. So I'm going to reach for a dynamic contrast filter and go back to my 0 setting. And here's kind of a little trick that I use, or it's not really a secret. I usually kind of ignore the medium and I play with the large and the small. And it's just a matter of taste, really. Sometimes I think the medium gets a little too grungy for me and it starts to look a little, I don't know, halo-y. And, you know, a lot of people probably like that, but that's just not my taste. And so I'll typically bring up the large a little bit, and then, you know, I'm going after the small. And I get kind of the same effect almost, but it's a little more restrained. Now, the one thing that you got to watch out for here, and let's just zoom in here a little bit, is these finer details. So these finer details will tend to get overdone if you go too hard with this. So I'm going to govern that a little bit. I'm actually going to end up painting some of this out. So let's zoom out to full screen again. And I'm just going to throw a mask on here and grab a paint out brush, which we already have selected at 100%. And I'll probably start around 40% opacity because I don't want to take any more out than I have to. So here we go. I'm just going to paint this back, some of these smaller details. And that's what I think we're probably going to need to go in over here, just like that. Perfect. And that looks pretty darn good. A little bit there. Okay. So I'm starting to think about this wall now. And this is the subject of my photograph. And I've got plenty of contrast in here, right? Because I got a white wall and a black tree. So I don't need to worry about having too much going on out here. If you have too much going on out here, then the photograph gets kind of busy and, you know, viewers don't know where to look. And I'm a big believer that as a viewer, I shouldn't have to decode the photograph. Like, do you want me to look at the wall? Do you want me to look at the tree? What do you want me to look at? Well, I want you to look in here. So I'm going to downplay this and use this for context. So we're going to go and grab a tone enhancer, and I'm just going to, I could probably just reduce the exposure here. Just like that. And I'm going to grab my mask, and I'm just going to paint this middle section out. And I know that there's a lot of people that think you have to have perfect masks to make good photographs. And I'm just going to encourage you to let go of that idea, because you don't. You need a mask that's good enough. And if you're watching, you know, any of the masks that I'm making are not perfect, but they get the job done. And I used to make masks for a living. And let me tell you, after that, I don't want to work any harder than I have to make a mask.
You know, Jim, just wanted to jump in here because I know you've told me personally this tip before about brushing in masks. And I noticed you doing it and can hear your clicks, but maybe you could tell the viewers here about how you actually use multiple clicks with creating your mask. Use it more like a brush rather than a, you know, straight eraser, if you will.
Okay, so if you could see my right hand, I actually have the mouse in my hand and my Wacom pen between my fingers because I use both. And that's a really good question. So let's just reset this mask. So I like to add my masks gradually, and you can see what my opacity is here. It's 40%. And if I add this all at one time, then the transition from these outer walls to this inner sanctum here becomes really jarring. And I don't want that. I want to create some dimension and some depth. And I'm also going to use as large of a brush as I can get away with, because if you use small brush strokes, you run a greater risk of having people spot them. So by making multiple passes on this, and you know, the first pass is just kind of a general all over the place kind of pass. And I've always got my eye on what's going on over here, because I can see my mask, right? And I can see if I miss something. So now I might make another pass in the center, and I'm already creating depth with my mask by deciding what it is that I want to bring back and what I don't. Does that answer the question, Michael?
Yeah, that's perfect. One of the best tips you ever told me, Jim.
You don't need me anymore then.
Not just yet. Maybe in one day.
Okay, so you know, already, let's just turn the preview off here. So already we've got something that's kind of cool. So I think I actually want to darken this wall a little more, especially this part here. I'm happy with what's going on up here, but I'm going to go back to the exposure control here, because I brought the exposure control down, and I'm going to reset that. And I'm going to use the curve instead because I have more control. So I'm just going to drag down from this center part here, and I'm really going to darken the snot out of this thing. And I know it's getting really dark up at the top, but this is more what I want. And I think I'll actually pull these tones down just a bit too, just to maintain more of that kind of linear tonal relationship between my lights and my darks, right? If I leave this up here and just do this, then it gets really contrasty. And that's not really what I want. So I want to maintain that linear relationship. Add a little bit of contrast. Okay, so I can use that other trick now and just pull my blacks back up like that. That's not really what I want. Or I can go back to my mask here and I can just start to paint out some of these darker areas, right? And I can use the same kind of principle that we just talked about, which is to do it gradually and use multiple brush strokes or multiple clicks at low opacity to kind of bring a mottled light look back into this area. So I've got my paint out brush already selected. I'm at 40. I'm even going to reduce it further. I'm going to go down to 10, which is really light, and just start clicking in here. And I'm going to start bringing back. Again, I need to go to 20. All right, just start bringing back some of this stuff. And I think my computer's rebelling. I am painting out. And I'm on the right thing. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, so I'm going to undo that brush stroke. And we'll just reduce the opacity of this a little bit. So let's go to 30 and just start to click in here. And you can see that I can bring some of this stuff back now, right? And now I'm just painting like with the feathered edge of the brush. I'm not in here, you know, doing this. I just want the light to kind of creep in here just a little bit. Perfect. There we go. And I kind of like the idea that there might be something going on down this hallway, like maybe somebody coming with a flashlight or something that might creep us out. So a little light creeping in from the top here. So we can do, you can use this kind of stuff to create all kinds of atmosphere. And really, you know, if you're smart about your dodging and burning, that's what you can do. You can create something that feels completely different than what you shot. And maybe it's what you imagined. And I always kind of imagined this, you know, this is being kind of creepy. Okay. So I don't even really need to darken the outer edges of this photograph anymore, but I want to open up this inner part. And let's just put a glow on here and see what happens. So we're just going to do it on this part. I know it's darkening the outer part, and I'm just kind of ignoring that. Let's see if that helps us. I bet you if we change the blend mode to screen, and let's not do that. I'm not happy with that. So I'm going to use the blur again, and I'll reduce the blur a little bit, about 20 pixels, and now we're going to change the blend mode to screen. Don't be afraid to play around with this stuff and, you know, try to figure out what it is exactly that you want to do. So I don't want it on the outer edges of this, but if I've got light spilling in from inside here, what's really going to happen is that it's going to kind of bleed around the edges of the door, right? So I want that. I obviously need to reduce the opacity of this some. So we're going to put a mask on here and invert it. And I'm just going to use my brush, and I'm just going to click around with my mouse a few times. So I'll probably increase my opacity to about 40, and I'm going to be painting in. So let's just, and I'll let this blur kind of bleed out over the edges of the door like that. And just a little bit up there, a little bit up there. And that's looking pretty good. So here's where we started. And that's where we ended up. And we used, you know, pretty simple tools, really. The only thing that is kind of out of the ordinary that we used was the blur, which I really like because it just kind of gives you that smeary kind of film noir look. And we created something that's pretty compelling, I think. Michael, you got any questions there?
No questions on this one. I think everyone is just kind of soaking everything in from you. This was great. So keep on. All
right, so let's move on to the next one. So we'll go back to the browse module, and let's work on this one. So we'll go back to the effects module. So here we have, this is a funny story about this one. This is the side of the road in Scotland. Like you're driving down the road and you're like, oh my God, I got to stop over and take a photo of that because it's awesome. And that kind of stuff is everywhere. It's everywhere you look. And so I couldn't resist pulling over and grabbing a shot of this. So let's add a filter and go to our black and white and see what we can get out of this. See how much we can get away with darkening our sky. Now I'm going to darken this all the way. And I just want to point something out here. So let's zoom in next to the tree. Okay, so the thing that you need to watch out for, and a lot of you probably already know this, is these colors kind of bleeding together and creating halos. And we don't have that problem right here at this point, but let me show you something that is a really handy trick to do if you have colors that don't have a lot of separation, whoops, wrong filter, that don't have a lot of separation, and you want to kind of darken and get more control over your color, and that's to put a color enhancer underneath the black and white effect. So we got to go all the way down to the bottom here and just drop it right there. Okay, so if I zoom back out, there's nothing happening with this color enhancer yet, but if I grab my blues, let's say, and I increase the saturation of my blues, I'm increasing the intensity of that color, and that's going to have an effect on how this black and white layer converts that to black and white. So watch this. See how my sky starts to get dark? Now I'm going to darken this all the way. See these halos here? That's because the blue from the sky is actually reflecting off the edges of the trees. So you have to be really careful with this, that you don't go too far. But we can get a little extra out of here. And if I go to my aqua, which has some green in it, I might be able to get away with a little more without getting that haloing effect. So let's just jump in here and have a look. And yeah, looks like I'm pretty safe. Okay, good. So just if you can manipulate your colors before you convert them to black and white, you get more control over them. So I'm going to go back up into the black and white effect now. And let's go back to our yellow-green kind of matrix here. So we'll push the yellows and pull the greens back, or do we want to go the other way around? Well, if I do that, that's kind of flat, I think. So we're going to go with featuring yellows and bringing the greens down. All right. So I've got a nice image that's got lots of nice shapes, and I want to play up those shapes. So what I'm going to do is start my dodging and burning process. And I'm going to dodge first. I've got all these nice, so back to Philip's question, what am I going to dodge? Or I'm sorry, what am I going to burn? That's what I'm going to do first. I've got all these nice shadowy contours in my hills that are really not prominent players. And I want to make them more prominent than they are. So let's create a tone enhancer and pull the curve down. And I'm kind of looking at these shadowy areas to see how far down I want to go. And usually I'll go further than I think I need to go, again, so that I don't run out of darkness. I'm not concerned about these areas because we're not going to go in there. And I'm just going to flip my mask over to black by inverting it. And now I'm just going to grab my brush, and we're going to be painting in. So I've got a paint in here, 100% feather, and I'm going for 20% opacity. And I'll start kind of big. I'm going to start to work on some of these larger features first and just go for what's really obvious, like this. That's really obvious. And, you know, right in here. And you can see this stuff start to come to life already. And I'm using my Wacom tablet here at this point because it's pressure sensitive, and I can vary the opacity of my stroke based on how hard I press. And for those of you that are doing, you know, this kind of work, if you're not using a Wacom tablet, if you get one and you start using it, I promise you, you will never go back, because it gives you a tremendous amount of control. All right, so just in there a little bit, maybe back in here. You can see I'm varying the size of my brush as I need to just, I don't know what happened to my mask there. Anyway, here we go. To just get some nice texture in here. So I can start to play up in this area as well. And something happened to my mask. Oh, it moved. That might be a beta thing. Michael, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that one is actually a bug right now in the beta. We just talked about that one. That should be resolved for the full launch.
All right, so let's just, you know what? Let's just kind of start over. And nobody's bleeding, nobody died. It's not a big deal, right? It's just photography. We're having a good time.
And for everyone listening, we should actually have an update on the beta here coming soon. We should be posting an announcement on our Facebook and on our blog, so stay tuned for that. There will be another update here for the RAW 18 beta.
All right, so here we go. Back in business. So I'm just kind of being general around these areas because I know we're kind of probably, I don't know how we're doing. How are we doing on time, Michael?
We are doing pretty good on time. We have about 15 to 20 minutes left, so just keep on trucking away, and if you get close, I will let you know.
All right. I'm kind of planning in my head here for what I want to do. So in these shadows in here, I'm going to just kind of, you know, grab onto what's already dark, because guess what? I'm going to lighten a lot of the stuff that's around it. And by lightening that stuff and darkening the other things, we're going to create a lot of shape that already exists in our photos. But right, photography is a two-dimensional medium, and we can't see the third dimension. So this is a great way to create it. So here's my before and after, and that's looking pretty good. I'll probably come back to this layer after I start to dodge. So I'm going to add another tone enhancer and just pull this up. And now we're going to work on the edges of this foliage where the light is really reflecting and giving this thing 3 dimensions. So let's just invert this mask. And now I'm going to start to do the same thing. I'm going to start to just paint some of these highlights in. You know, and you don't have to go really far or really hard with this. There we go. And I don't know if you can see what's happening on my mask or not, but got all these little bright strokes on it where I've lightened things and darkened things. All right, so we're just emphasizing what's already here. Now I'm going to go up into this tree a little bit. Let me make my brush a little bit bigger. And I'll just work the top part of these leaves, these clumps of leaves in the trees, and just bring them out. This all looks pretty good over here. I don't really need to do anything over there, I don't think. But just along that edge there, here. All right. So I'm going to go back to my, let's just take a look at that layer. Right? You can see that stuff starting to kind of come alive. So at this point, you know, if you're doing this right, you're really thinking like a painter, more like a painter than a photographer anyway. So I grab my brush and I'm going to just start to I'm burning again. Now I'm darkening, and I'm just looking to create some separation between the areas that I just lightened and the surrounding areas. So I might make my brush a little smaller here. There we go. Just like that. And maybe the undersides of these leaves, right? There we go. And just these little areas in here. So when you're doing this, until you're practiced at it, you're going to be like, is anything happening? I can't really tell. So you'll be turning your dodge and burn layer on and off frequently, and that's okay, because a lot of these little strokes add up to big difference. And we're looking pretty good. I think I just want to work this area over here a little more. And now I'm going to create a line of contrast there that actually wasn't there, because I want this to kind of flow down into my photo, right? So we'll just kind of create some lines that move across the bottom edge of the photo. There we go. Kind of digging a trench into the grass. I'm sure that the landowner of this place in Scotland would not be amused. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so let's take a look at where we started, and here's where we are now. So now we can start to have some fun with kind of darkening some things. And in this case, what I think I'm going to do is just darken the whole thing. Just like this. Pretty dark. And again, I'm going to maintain, see how this gets really contrasty now? I want to maintain the linear relationship of my tones. So I'm going to pull my lights down a little bit. And now it's acting more like an exposure control, right? And now I'm just adding a little bit of contrast. So I don't want to go too far, because in some of these areas, I'm going to leave this alone. And I'm going to grab my brush tool and make my brush big, like this. And I think we'll start at about 40% opacity. And I'm just going to click right on my tree. I'm painting. I want to paint out, actually. I'm painting out, so click. And I'm just going to create some light here. I don't like that last stroke. It's too big, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm just going to start to create some light on some of the things that I want to see. I'm going to reduce that opacity even more. We're going to go down to 30. Because I'd rather make 2 brush strokes than 1. So I want my tree, and you can probably hear my mouse going. And now I'm going to use my brush, I think, and just kind of sweep across this landscape like this, and start to paint in some of these smaller areas and bring them back. And maybe some of these shadows, we don't want them to get too carried away. Just a little bit in here, a little bit over here, a little bit here, a little bit there. There we go. I actually think that a friend of mine is watching, because I just got a text message from her. So I'm guessing she's. What do you think about what we got going on here, Michael?
Oh, we got a few questions here about feathering on your brush, and one about develop versus effects. I guess to start out with the develop versus effects, a couple customers have noticed that you're mainly in effects and you're not really in develop at all. Is that just a personal preference, or is there something?
Yeah, it's just a personal preference, really. And I did all of my, as I said when we started, I prepared these files ahead of time so that we could, didn't have to spend a bunch of time in the develop module doing that, so that we could have some fun with actually making these photos. So not that I find anything wrong with develop, I don't, but it was just, yeah, that's just my personal preference.
All right, and next question about feathering a mask. It's a fairly general question, but could you just explain how you feathered the mask, showing, with the slider up there, and explain exactly what that does? I think a few people are just
feather the mask. I don't have a feather on this mask.
Or it was a question from the old one. I think they were talking about when you were using the edge of the feather brush on the light leak.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so if I zoom out a little bit here, and I'll just actually create an example here for you. So let's just, I don't want to zoom out that far, so let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so let's say that I want to darken the bottom of my photograph some more. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can use exposure controls. I'm just going to grab a curve here. I'm just going to darken the bottom of this. Okay. So if I add a black mask to this and I want to bring my feathering back, or bring my my darkness back. So we know that the edge of this brush is feathered. It's very soft. If I reduce my feathering to 0, this is going to be really obvious. I'm going to paint in, and if I start painting in, I get that kind of, right, you can see it, that that hard edge. So let me increase the opacity of my, let's undo that stroke, and I'll increase the opacity of my brush to 100%. Right, so you get that ugly hard edge. If I use a feather and I go all the way to 100%, and I can make a stroke here. So let's say I want to use a smaller brush, and my brush is feathered, right? So I come across like this. I don't have the hard edge, and I've still made, pardon me, my darkening effect. The way I like to do it is to use a bigger brush, because bigger brushes have bigger feathers. They're softer on the outside. And so a softer edge to me looks more organic. And so now if I just use the edge of the brush, and you can see that the center point of my brush is actually off my photo, and I paint in. So now I get this nice graded shadow across the bottom of my photo. So that's why I do it that way, because I like that really, really soft edge. Bigger brushes have a softer edge than smaller brushes, because the amount of softness that you see is proportional to the size of the brush, right?
Yeah, nice.
So does that answer the question, Michael?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think you got it dead on there, bullseye.
All right, so I think we're kind of at a place now where we can start to think about finishing this off. And we could go a bunch of different ways with it. Let's see if we can add a vignette here, a light vignette in the middle, maybe. And I'm going to use a tone enhancer and just lighten this curve up. And so at this point, I can use this curve to start to create contrast, right? Because I can bring the bottom part of this curve down like that. And it looks like something out of a 1930s horror movie. Okay, so if I take my mask on this and invert it, and now I use a big brush, and I'm going to paint in at, say, 50%, and I start to click. I got to click here, here, and here, and here. So I just want to say one thing about lightening and darkening tones, and that's that it's much easier to lighten tones that you've already darkened than it is to, I'm sorry, it's much easier to darken tones that you've already lightened than it is to lighten tones that you've already darkened. And I hope the reasons for that are kind of obvious, but if you, you'll see me darken and then bring light back in a lot, and that's why I do it that way, because if I lighten the tone, then I have the latitude to bring this stuff back. And we'll just paint a little bit across the bottom there. And I think I want to bring this out. I'm going to paint out a little bit right here just to bring that texture back. And that's looking pretty good. How are we doing on time, Michael?
You know, we're getting pretty close here, about 5 or 10 minutes left. So I think it's probably a good time if you want to keep finishing up this one or have any closing thoughts on this image. Yeah, got about 5 or 10 minutes left.
All right, so I think at this point, if I'm going to start to finish this off, actually, I'm going to go into my tree here. And I want to, it's getting a little kind of washed out, right? So I'm going to grab my my brush here. Actually, let's get rid of this layer. I'm going to grab my brush here, and I'm going to start to paint out some of this lightning effect here, just on some of these branches and stuff, so I can bring back some contrast here, because this started to get a little out of hand. So now I want to be painting in that darkening effect. So I'm going to flip over, and I think I'll go to like a 40% brush or a 30% brush. Let's try 30 and see if we can get away with that. And I just want to start to bring back some of these branches here. We want to paint out. There we go. And I'm just kind of clicking along the edges of my branches here. Here we go. You got to be careful that, you know, if you're going to add a glow, it doesn't get really out of hand. So let's zoom out and see how that looks. And yeah, I think that's looking a little better. That still needs a little bit of work. Just kind of do it in a more general way here. There we go. All right. And there you have it. So looking pretty good, I think. Yeah. Okay, Michael. Michael, back to you.
I want to show us a before real fast so we can see before now.
Absolutely. There's your before, and that's what we got now.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jim, I think this is a good time to close it on down here. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Jim, and everyone who attended. Thank you for joining us. If I didn't get to your question, which I don't think I missed anyone, but if not, I'll send you over an email. Jim, if you have any final parting thoughts you want to leave the audience, why don't you go ahead and say them now?
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, the critical thing with black and white is to remember to manage your tones on the way in. Don't give yourself so much highlight and shadow that you box yourself in and you can't add it later. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come today. So thank you.
Awesome. Jim, thank you. And everyone attending right now still, I will be posting this on our blog and our YouTube today. Give me a few hours. If you want to go back and look at it, it will be posted. And thank you for joining us. Jim, you have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.